Hi everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Tom Clearwater. I have been hanging around the integral community a little bit on the outskirts for about 10 years now. I know Bruce from personally having met him and having had several interactions in various formats with him and various other people of the integral community. I've also been involved in the disclosure movement, as it were, this from a fairly involved angle some years ago. And so I have a bit of a bead on kind of what's happening there from an interesting angle, which I will be sharing from in this video, certainly. And where to start with this question? My goodness, it's like it's such a big question. What is this shift that we are apparently going into and going through, as particularly now manifesting with this TTSA phenomenon, which is a bit of a strange bird in the sky. Eh? It's like WTF. These people pull a video from a warship back from 2004, and we're now heading into 2020 here, and so that's a long time ago. And yet this thing is just making waves now, and doing so with the backing of the primary media involved, I would say, from the Democrat side, which is to say you have the New York Times, Washington Post following in. I think Politico has seen. I think basically everybody has basically jumped on board to some degree or another with this revelation of this so-called Nimitz incident. So I want to give a bit of a history of our history, if I can call it that, from my perspective of kind of what is implied in this change that we are seeing unfold, basically, with what is happening in society now. And to do that, I'm going to kind of give a roundabout talk, as it were, discussing kind of the physical aspect of what it implies to actually have a craft or a technology, a capability to actually manipulate gravity in the way that these craft in the Nimitz incident quite clearly appear to be doing. And then I'll kind of go into some social issues and the issues of the structuring of society, as it were, which are quite involved in regards to this matter. So let's go to the Nimitz incident, and let's just take as for granted that what was photographed there was a type of technology we have not seen in the public domain. So you've got this craft, and you've got quite a number of people who have witnessed these craft go into the water, go into mountains, into the land, go into space, right? There's just with seemingly zero effect from the surrounding environment. That is, they can travel into water having the same zero inertial gravitic effect from the water on the craft as in air. So that, for instance, in the video, the craft was sitting in a fairly breezy spot and wasn't moving, evidently wasn't affected by the wind, and quite surely when it moved, it wasn't affected by the wind that it would create with that movement, if the movement were the normal kind of movement we see with airplanes and such. So that this form of gravity control, if you want to call it that, is a way of excluding the craft or whatever the object might be from the normal effects, inertial and momentum effects of matter itself. So that what you have in gravity control is a control effectively over mass. And of course that makes a lot of sense, because you cannot have mass without gravity and vice versa. These two are very closely implied concepts in our understanding of what matter itself is. So with the Nimitz incident, what we have on the horizon is a foundational change in what our understanding of matter is. This is not a small change. I mean, most people's reference for what reality is, at some very deep level, typically the deepest, references what their understanding of matter is, and what matter is as mass and matter as gravity, etc., and all the incidents of mass and gravity, including inertia and all those kind of so-called Newtonian elements that come into play when something moves through space. So that what this Nimitz incident really implies is that we are on the cusp of waking up into a completely new understanding of reality, such that our old understanding, which is the old Newtonian, Einsteinian understanding of this is what space is, and this is how space works, and with Einstein you can only affect gravity by having some huge stellar or planetary object in space affecting the bend of space, and therefore giving a gravitic effect, etc. All that is wrong. It's categorically wrong, because here we have a small object which is affecting gravity in such a fashion that no longer do those rules of relativity and Newtonian physics apply. That's a huge change, and I think it's quite correct that as the previous video makers in this little series have presented, that what is at stake here is a fundamental change in our understanding of what reality is as a reality, so that all of our ontologies, which basically are implicitly ontologies of matter and mass, all of those ontologies are out the window. And what we have to look into now is what is going to be the new perspective that will be gained as the new landscape settles, as it were, into what will become this new understanding based on this foundational change. So that's a big deal, and I can see from let's say a disclosure perspective why, for instance, the government would have some trepidation, even kind of approaching that line to then cross it as a societal change. What you have to be looking at there is a kind of change which I would call a quantum shift, personally. That what we are looking at, even from, let's say, a developmental angle, is a change in our perspective of what it actually means to change. So our understanding of change is changing, where what it means to change now will include this necessary feature of a quantum leap, that yes, there are incremental changes which can be plotted on some or other continuum of sorts, but that continuum doesn't merely just travel in a consistent straight line forward. It has something of a curving upwards in magnitude, where upon that curve, upon that parabolic rise in not only the a number of incidents of change, but their meaning at the end of that rise, what you have is a quantum leap. And by a quantum leap, that's a term that has become unfortunately fashionable, and it's been so misused. But it's appropriate in the sense that it implies that there are actual state changes, much like what we see in, let's say, the states of matter, where we have, let's say, plasma, gas, liquid, and solid. And between those states, there are no intermediating incremental states themselves. You merely have a shift when going from one to the other, where there is no transitional stage. This is the meaning of quantum. It's the meaning of what it means to change in a quantum understanding. So that every change in a quantum understanding is a whole state change. There are no transitional states between two whole states, A and B, where A and B therefore change by necessary implication instantaneously. Now that's not a concept that is understood by Newtonian or Einsteinian physics, which has basically banished those ideas. Apart from that, this idea of a state change is something, of course, that Clare Graves theorized in saying that society is approaching a grand leap, and I think he's correct. And I think the leap is in part, and from a developmental perspective, a leap into an understanding of leapiness, that what we are dealing with in this universe is a quantum reality, where change has this quantum leaping aspect. But let's leave that aside for now, and let's go a little bit into some of the disclosure dynamics as I see them playing out. How to segue into this? This one is so complicated. If you have a technology that can effectively affect matter, mass, gravity, if you have a technology that can influence gravity, it can influence matter at the foundational level of what that matter is and must be. And because such a technology is so incredibly powerful, by necessary implication of what it must be able to do in its ability to affect gravity, i.e., in its ability to affect mass, i.e., in its ability to affect the constitutional reality of matter itself, that technology is far more powerful than what we have seen, for instance, with a nuclear bomb. And it is my opinion that those technologies are not so complicated. And because they are not so complicated and can be dreamed up by somebody who kind of gets on the right line of what the appropriate science is, there must exist in society a mechanism by which the destructive effects of those technologies can be controlled. And so we have been, therefore, under what appears to me from this angle only, and there might be other angles, and we can question that, but even from the angle of social safety, from societal security, there has to have had been a prohibition against people even coming into the understanding, the knowing of what this science is and can do. And in my books, that's Tesla science. And it's the reason why Tesla was basically scrubbed from the history books. And it's the reason why in 1952 or 53, the whole science went black. It used to be discussed in trade journals like various aerospace journals and whatnot, and who's doing some sort of gravity control over here and who's got some gizmo over there, and suddenly the whole thing went black. Some decision was made at some level that this technology is too powerful to not only too powerful to be advertised, but too powerful to fall into any kind of given person's hands, where it could be used in such a fashion as to destroy mass. And so, what was required was that the science and the knowledge that the science could exist, which is implied by the knowledge of UFOs, etc., all of that had to have been taken off the radar screen of culture. And it seems to me that the very basis for allowing those technologies to be given some sort of public airing, and to allow the public to understand that, yes, there is a science that goes way beyond what Einstein dreamed of, and is far more powerful than anything relativistic has ever produced. That in order for even knowledge of that, the fact of that science, the existence of it, regardless of whether the given person has any idea how that knowledge works or how that science could possibly be formulated, even the knowledge of the fact of its existence had to have been scrubbed until such time as there was set in place in society total surveillance of information, which is required because you're going to have to know, if this science is out in the public domain, you're going to have to know who is possibly toying with it in their garage even. It's so powerful. And you're going to have set in place a bunch of laws whereby the state can act if it finds some evidence in the surveilled information that some party, entity, person, whatever, or group is somehow acting in a fashion that could possibly lead to detrimental consequences. Those two functions have been fulfilled. So we have total information surveillance from computers and phones and iPads and gadgets and all sorts of things, including stoves and fridges and God knows your automatic lights and Siri and what's Alexa on the Google side, etc. Said Alexa. Anyways, total surveillance is in place, and laws dealing with this new regime were set in place post 9/11. Now, of course, it's my perspective that 9/11 was a directed energy event, which means that 9/11 was using this new technology, this Tesla technology, in a destructive fashion to basically disappear the buildings. They're gone, which means the matter has been destroyed. And then post 9/11, you get this rush of legislation all around the developed world, at least, putting in place laws to deal with weapons of mass destruction. And that wording is technically applicable, because what this technology does is, on a destructive side, is it destroys mass. So we have information surveillance in place, and we have legislation in place allowing now, at least at the initial stage, the fact of a new science to be presented to the public. That by implication, let's say, of the Nimitz incident, we have a science at play there, regardless if the vehicles are staffed by or driven or somehow operated and controlled by humans or ETs, doesn't matter. It implies a science that goes beyond everything that is currently known in the known scientific field. So my notions of change are all wrong, check. My notions of science are all wrong, check. My notion of reality is wrong, check. My notion of what it means for society to be operating the way it is are wrong, check. My notions of who's and what is in control here in society is probably wrong, check. That's a big change. And so why don't we now just segue over to ask kind of who's driving this change and what's going on there? Is there anything that we can know about that? Well, I think the TTSA fairly squarely lands in the camp of the Democrats in the United States. If you look at some of what WikiLeaks disclosed in the last 2016 election. They disclosed that Tom DeLonge was speaking with, what was his name? John Podesta, who was intimately involved in the Democrats, including Obama's administration and with Hillary. And he was the big UFO guy, obviously. And he was in those emails that were disclosed, speaking with DeLonge about DeLonge's intentions and understandings of who DeLonge was going to speak with, et cetera, et cetera. Anyways, Hillary herself has been photographed carrying around a UFO book, and both she and Bill and Obama himself were on Jimmy Kimmel and said, yeah, we're going to be disclosing some stuff by implication of what they said there. The entire disclosure movement, I think, from that angle, is a Democratic play, and if you look at history, basically, in the 1920s, oil was established as the foundational energy of society, and it then became reality, social reality, that those who controlled oil basically controlled society and effectively controlled the world, because they were able to control the primary input into economic activity and commercial activity, which is oil. And basically, those who controlled oil became largely the Republicans. So you have this Republican-Democrat split, where the Democrats have been effectively held out of the kind of baseline lever of control, which is the control over oil, and that has largely been kind of a Republican domain, and so in order for the Democrats to unseat the Republicans, what they need is a demonstration to society that oil is not viable any longer, that the science giving rise to all the machines that run on oil and the science that arises from understandings of the way mechanics works based on oil, on the old mechanical understanding of reality, all of that science is out the window, because you have a new science based on anti-gravity propulsion that shows that the old kinetic science, which is basically the science of oil, is obsolete. And so it has been basically a democratic function to attempt to disclose to society that there exists a new form of science and scientific understanding, a new form of technology that wholesale renders oil obsolete and shows that the use of oil by those who actually use it in the upper reaches of power is a calculated use to keep their own control, basically. That these people also know that these other technologies exist, etc., and so that their use of oil, their continued use of oil in society as such, is basically a mechanism of control. And so it's my understanding that that yes, this disclosure movement is driven by the Democrats, who want to unseat oil as the primary control lever in society. And to do so, they're bringing along such doctrines as global warming, which of course are based on the old Newtonian relativistic science, right? So they're out the window. It's like that's not how planets work, right? But they're using it, and who knows, maybe they have a deeper understanding of using a new science that says there are some vulnerabilities from extracting all this oil out of the ground. I can appreciate that as a possibility. But according to the old science, no, that doesn't work. And it's the whole global warming meme is therefore a democratic initiative in order to try to unseat oil as the primary source of social political power, right? So it doesn't surprise me that the TTSA is brought to us by our good friends, the Democrats, whoever the Democrats are, and whoever is whoever they are serving. Who do they represent in terms of people on this planet? Don't know. And do they represent people off planet? Don't know. All of that is as it were above the cloud layer. So if you look up, you see all these kind of lines of convergence. Then they're going up, and boom, there's a cloud layer that effectively blocks understanding or insight into the upper layers of power on this planet. And what is above the cloud layer? Are there forms of extraterrestrial control over this planet? Very possibly, but personally, I don't know. I don't know if that's right. Don't know if that's true, though I suspect it is. In any event, the power structure up there is in the dark, and to us, and so far as I can understand, they're fighting each other, such that the big fight on this planet is the fight between factions that are existing way up there above the clouds, right? Who are fighting each other to gain some sort of control and influence down here amongst the hoi polloi here, who we are in our daily lives, and so that this initiative by what I'm calling the Democrats to kind of build all these foundations for a new understanding and a new world, basically a new power structure. This initiative is one that has. Hello again. New context, new look. I've got a slightly grainier screen because the light down here is not as bright. Kids are asleep upstairs. And I was describing this Democrat initiative to unseat oil as the primary source of Republican power, and that initiative is multi-pronged, of course, and it includes what I mentioned as the global warming meme, which is a primary initiative of the Democrats to basically turn society against oil and to provide means within various countries that adopt that meme, so far as they adopt it, to tax carbon and basically turn industry toward alternative sources, that is, alternative to oil, basically to reduce the power of oil in the world. Well, there were other arms of this overall initiative, including the disclosure initiative that I was speaking of, and political means by which the Democrats have attempted to put a new regime into place. Like, for instance, when Obama came into power, he quickly got busy working to get the Paris Accord agreed upon, which of course is a global warming agreement for nations to basically turn their internal domestic economies toward alternative energy sources away from oil. That initiative was for its part supplemented, curiously enough, by Obama's friends at the banks funding the American fracking movement, which was basically juiced under Obama's administration, and whereby, astonishingly, they basically caused the American oil production to double. You had seen this rise of American production in the 1970s, and then down it came, and part of that decline was thought to be this necessary process of peak oil and all that kind of depletion stuff, etc. And lo and behold, Obama comes into power, and boom, American production goes way back up, basically doubles and increases to a point where of greater production than America had ever seen. So what that did was it of course crashed the oil price, and having crashed the oil price, the entire oil power base was put into disarray. And complementing that disarray, Obama basically got agreement with Iran to allow Iran to re-enter the oil market. And for those who don't know, I think Iran probably has the greatest amount of oil on this planet, more than Saudi Arabia, I think. And so getting Iran back onto the oil market assured the result that the oil control over oil production and control over price would be quite destabilized. Anyways, so you got all these initiatives, all these attacks coming from the Democrat side, and one of those attacks, a big one, is this disclosure thing that is now kind of rolling forward from the Democrat side. And of course, with TTSA, you had Harry Reid was the Senate Majority Leader. He's this Democrat who was involved in funding and setting out some of this money, which was actually sent out to one of their buddies, aerospace guy, Bob Bigelow. And Bigelow, the reason they put the money to Bigelow is because they don't want the Republicans to understand what's happening, and so they have to, any funding for what they're going to do with this disclosure plan that they're developing has to be effectively off the books, and it has to be off public books. And so they give the money out to a private contractor who then uses that money primarily that money was not necessarily in its kind of like first application to fund the whole disclosure, TTSA, Nimitz kind of stuff, but was funding studies of paranormal phenomena occurring at some ranch in one of those Midwestern states. And there was some movie that was to be made from this, and it was concerning the Skinwalker Ranch. And you might, look up the movie. I think it's Hunt for the Skinwalker or something. Anyways, it's done by people associated with Coast to Coast, and that whole part of kind of like the social dialogue around UFOs, etc. That's all Democrat stuff. These are all Democrats kind of setting out, this like they've got their movie makers, they've got their reporters, they've got their information sources putting into play this kind of groundswell of activities to bring this disclosure reality to the fore, and so this money was given out to Bigelow, who was then looking at paranormal stuff on this Skinwalker Ranch, and it's really, really bizarre stuff. And if you want to kind of go into the weird and the wonderful, check out the movie that was made. It was made by Jeremy Corbell, who incidentally is the fellow who was brought in regards to the citizen hearing, which I funded, and Corbell is now going to be using that footage to probably bring out something. In any event, he did a movie on the Skinwalker Ranch, and some really awesomely strange stuff happening there. And then whether it's happening due to just simple kind of natural causes, like a resonance node or something that is causing some form of happenings there, or whether there's some sort of, like, who knows, base underneath the ground that is causing some form of functional weirdness on the surface, etc. Don't know, but it's worth looking at. But anyways, all these people are on the same team. If you look at some of the movies that are made, they all come from the same production house, right? It's Studio 1091, or it used to be something else. But anyways, these are all on the same team, and it's all this Democrat push, and the Republicans really, they really don't want anything to do with that disclosure element. And that doesn't mean that they don't understand what's happening and that they don't perceive realities that are being disclosed in this disclosure process. Doesn't mean anything like that. If you look at, for instance, Donald Trump, Donald Trump's uncle was Trump, some other Trump, who was one of the head scientists of the MIT Rad Lab, which is like the nuclear and high science laboratory at MIT involving very high-tech secretive stuff. Like, this guy was super plugged in. He was the guy, actually, to whom all of Tesla's documents were given after Tesla died, and the government or FBI, whoever it was, raided Tesla's safe. All those documents were given to Trump's uncle. So Trump is squarely involved in this stuff. But you ask, if any question is asked of him concerning aliens, the only aliens I know are the aliens coming across the border, right? That's his response. It's deflection. It's total deflection. Even though for instance, he has said in public no fewer than 10 times, including to the CEO of Lockheed Martin. He's said things like 10 times that you guys got invisible planes, don't you? Right? He knows exactly what's happening, and they've got all the technologies, presumably. Yeah, of course they do. The Republicans, of course, they've got all these technologies. They were probably the ones who poofed the World Trade Center, right? Don't you think? Who else? So it's not that they don't believe, right? Of course, it's way beyond that. They have a different idea about how this whole thing should roll out. And it's not, to my perception, it's not an idea that is inimical to human life, to societal life, or anything like that. It's stupid ideas. They very probably have and are working from an idea that human society is better served by existing longer in the state of not knowing. That there are values at stake for not disclosing matters right now, and I personally can think of can mention certain values that were operated in my life. For instance, that if I had known about Tesla science and about anti-gravity science and about the existence of ETs and all that kind of stuff, if I had known that when I was younger, that would have just been received information that would have stopped my own progress to try to find on my own terms what I actually thought about reality. And because I was forced by the information vacuum that I lived in, that was created by this quarantine of knowing in society, because I was forced by that quarantine to delve into reality on my own terms, solely referencing what I could perceive and understand from my own resources, without some form of knowledge having been given to me, because I had to do that solely on my own, the pressure to actually fuse something inside me that would make sense of reality increased dramatically, and probably was the effective factor that actually, in my own development, caused what what happened in my life, which is, I find, profoundly well, to which I am profoundly thankful, actually, that my own developmental growth was extremely enhanced by my not having been given answers to questions that I had to therefore answer on my own. And having had to answer them on my own forced a developmental result that occurred. And so what I saw over the course of years was different factions and factors of my own being coming into coherence as a result of my having tapped ever deeper into realities that I had to go into within myself, because there's no without, there's no context without, there's no galactic context, there's no extraterrestrial context. All those connections were severed in this quarantine of knowledge, which is what the quarantine was. It's a severing of connections. It creates this little bubble called, this is my little earth reality, and how am I going to make sense of what life is, of what my own internal reality is, of how I feel about, let's say, any of the knowledge that was given to me, which I felt dissonance fundamentally. And where is that dissonance coming from? And why is it there? And what right? All of that because somebody had the wisdom to scrub all of what could be then given as received knowledge. And I have a lot of respect for that side of reality. And so far as this tension between the Democrats and the Republicans, any given day I could be on either side. Nor do I think that there is only human agency involved here. Like, again, I'm not, I don't have knowledge on this factor, but it's quite plausible to me that there are a variety of non-Earth civilizations quite interested in what's happening here. How to explain this one? As a civilization, we are only just now beginning to form a basis for an off-world understanding. So from that, what you can say is that as a civilization, we are, in that sense, of a civilization growing into an off-world awareness. We are, amongst other civilizations who have done that, we're the youngest. As the youngest civilization to be growing into an off-world understanding and perspective and functioning. As the youngest, we are the most developed. Just like your children are more developed than you, and just like you are more developed than your parents, and just like your parents are more developed than their parents, and on and on and on and on, right? The most developed person is the child. So in that sense, the child is the oldest, right? The youngest is the oldest. And being the oldest, but the youngest, simultaneously, of course, and being the oldest, I can see, for instance, that we here on Earth, our civilization being the youngest, and therefore being the oldest, being the most developed, therefore being the most powerful. That's what's at stake here, is that you have a development of a constitution, which is a human constitution here, a life form organization, whose power and potential power is greater than everything that went before. And so from that vantage point, I can understand that there very well could be many ET societies interested in what the heck is happening here. Particularly when you note that what is happening to us is that we are entering into a purely quantum perspective. That is the leap that we're going into. Presumably, we being the youngest and therefore the oldest, as it were, the most powerful, presumably that leap has not occurred, at least to the extent it will with us, with older species. And that includes all those ET races, presumably, presumed ET races, that have all these magical technologies and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. Fair enough. They've been at it for millions of years more than us, maybe, right? But if you look at if you take a developmental perspective, which is a developmental perspective applicable to the universe, and I'll get back to that in just a minute. But if you take a developmental perspective applicable to the universe, then we are the most developed. And that would be a cool sideshow to be observing, don't you think? I think that's true. So it's very possible that there are ET interests in what's happening with us, and it's very possible that the let's say the Republican line on disclosure, for instance, is driven by ET concerns. That we have a developmental process at play here, which is therefore a developmental process at risk of being thrown offside its better developmental track by this thing we call knowledge, right? So you can't give another person experience, but you can give a person knowledge that is beyond the experience of that person. I see this all the time in spiritual circles. People talk about unity, right? Blah blah blah. Bunch of bullshitters, right? And they're just parroting, right? This is like this fairy tale from Iran. It's one of the most profound ones. Basically, in the fairy tale, what you have to do is you have to go inside, and at the very end, you have to draw your bow and shoot the parrot. Right? You got to kill the parrot. You got to stop freaking parroting, right? Stop saying something that you've never experienced, and people don't understand that. They just, oh yeah, I'm one with the all, blah blah, etc. Give me a break. So, knowledge can perform this function of delaying inhibiting a person's development because they think they're there and they're not experientially. even though they have the knowledge and they've got some semblance of how the wording can be, pieced together to make it sound like I'm the guy, right? I'm there. You're not. So knowledge is dangerous, and I think there is some appreciation of that within ranks of those who are shepherding our population, as I think they are. And anyways, I don't want to just justify the Republican point of view, and neither do I want to just justify the Democrat point of view. You see the tension between them. I think that's a live wire, and I think there are values at stake on both sides that I, for example, appreciate. So let's leave that aside for a bit, and I just want to give also a scientific reference to kind of give a little bit better sense of how this Tesla technology works and what it can do. There's a guy in Germany. His name is Konstantin Meyl, spelled M-E-Y-L, and you can look him up on the internet. He's an electrical engineer, and he's a professor in Germany, very highly qualified guy. And basically what he did was he created a bunch of Tesla gear. He wanted to recreate what Tesla did and do it in a modern context, and do it with kind of low-powered Tesla tech, basically. And so what he did was he created a bunch of Tesla technology and went quite deeply into the science, and his scientific understanding became basically a scalar understanding, which is my understanding, but we differ a little bit. But regardless, his understanding basically became, for him and for people who have followed him and his students and whatever, a new form of science based on Tesla technology. So one of the things he did, and this is written up in a peer-reviewed article, and you can search it on Google by search Meyl, M-E-Y-L, P-E-A, as in a pea that grows in a garden, male pea hormone, and then with that search string, it'll bring up, either in the first or the second or third hit on Google, it'll bring up a peer-reviewed paper where what Meyl did was he set up two Tesla coils that were connected together and operating anti-phase to each other, counter-phase. So where one coil went positive, the second coil went negative in exact counter-phase operation. So you've got these two Tesla coils operating counter-phase to each other, whereby on one of the coils, Meyl placed some peas, that just agricultural peas, in a petri dish, and on the other coil he placed pea hormone developed by agricultural science for those peas. And what he did then was just turn the machine on, flick the switch, right? And the hormones and the peas were separated by something like 9 feet or something. And he turned it on just for a short, several seconds, I think, and turned it off, and lo and behold, relative to a control and to another circumstance that he set up in the experiment, the peas grew as though they had been fertilized with the physical hormone. Right? What's happening there? It's like the peas grew as if they had been given the hormone. But all you had was basically a waveform capture that, in the experiment, by presumption of what happened, combined the waveform reality of the peas with the waveform reality of the hormone to give a net combination of a hormone fertilized, or a hormone, what would you call it, factored P. So what this experiment does is it reveals that there is a waveform reality to everything particulate, and that waveform reality is the very constitutional basis of that particulate reality. Where if you can tap into that waveform reality, you can tap into the essence of what any given particle is. This is Tesla technology. This is what is implied by that fascinating paper that Mayle wrote in the experiment that he performed. Where then, if you go into the waveform reality, the waveform face of reality, where you have, on the one hand, you have a particulate face, which is, you know, all this stuff that we associate with matter and the exclusory function of matter, like, you know, I can't walk through walls and all that kind of stuff, right? That's all particles excluding one another. On the interior face of that, the interior pole of that, this is a polar reality I'm describing. On the interior pole of that, you have a waveform version, which is the opposite, in fact, of exclusory. It's inclusory. So that in the waveform aspect, or in the wave pole, you have a means by which you can, through the inclusory function of waveform operations, get to the reality of what that matter is. So you can disappear it, easy. You can transmute it, easy. You can cause P hormone to mix in waveform fashion with the P, easy, done, in a peer-reviewed experiment, right? That's Tesla tech, right? That's the power that we're dealing with here. And you've got an electrical engineer in Germany doing this, right? You know, a bunch of doctors and health practitioners in Europe have taken his Tesla's tiny little Tesla coils. One of them was a doctor working with cancer patients, and this doctor had a cancer patient that was really, really terminal. Like, this guy was on his way out, and so what? Because he was desperate, you know, he's like, let's do something, doctor. Let's do something with these coils. So what the doctor did was he took saliva from the cancer patient, and he spun it and he extracted cancer cells from his saliva and from his urine, I think, and to those cancer cells he added a chemotherapy agent, and the chemotherapy agent, of course, killed the cancer cells, and so he's got a bunch of dead cancer cells in this little petri dish. So he takes the Tesla coils. On one of the coils, he puts the dead cancer cells, and in between the two coils, because it's a radiating field, he gets the cancer patient to sit, and what then happens is that, you know, he turns the switch on, and lo and behold, the cancer disappears. Right? You say, well, what's happening there? Well, the waveform reality of cancer cell death is being vibrated combinatorially with the waveform reality of his entire physical person. So that cancer cell death is vibrated into him and presumably resonates wherever there's cancer cell. Right? And so cancer cell death resonates inside him. Poof, cancer's gone. Right? This is written up in one of Mayle's books. Numerous experiments like that. Right? This is Imagine the pharmaceuticals with that little piece of knowledge, right? Kiss your sales goodbye, right? Yeah, right. And you see where that's going to go, right? So that's Tesla Tech. It's a game changer. It changes everything. And like I said, it changes the very notion of what people consider reality, because it changes the entire understanding of what matter is and how matter can be engineered even and manipulated, and how this entire show is a show of vibration, basically. That what I call the exclusory function is a phenomenon. It's a phenomenon of consciousness. It's a configuration of experience. The exclusory configuration of reality is just that. It's a configuration. And it's a configuration that has an interior reality, which is waveform-like. And waveform-like in the manner of two counterphase signals, where the wave doesn't vibrate in space so much as it vibrates on the interior of space. So it's a non-spatial, combinatorial, magnitudinal scalar vibratory reality that exists as the very interior of all material expression, of what we call material expression, which is merely the exterior face of what on the interior is vibratory and scalar magnitudinal. It's combinatorial, it's unitive, right? You go inside to your awareness and it's unitive. Awareness is fundamentally one. It is that scalar vibration operating in the real. And that is the interior reality of the exterior face for a polar, two-pole reality called reality itself. So that's where we're headed, right? That's where we're headed. I got there personally. That's what happened to me in the last 15 years. Is that what was synthesized inside me was this purely polar understanding, so completely polarized perspective. And if you look at people in history who have attained a polar understanding, they tend to lead their fields, like people like Niels Bohr in quantum physics, people like Kurt Gödel in mathematics, Otto Rank in psychology, etc., and so on. People, like Lao Tzu, who attained a polar understanding. Was chapter 2 of his Tao Te Ching gives a purely polar description of polarity, of duality. So that everything that say the spiritual peeps have been trying to deal with in duality is the foundational reality of reality itself. And that polar perspective is fundamentally a Tesla perspective. Tesla's gear, the gizmos he created, were all based on a polar understanding, a polar application of electrical functioning, in fact. In any event, that's I think that's about it for now, and you can mull over what I've said and see how it strikes you, and let's continue the conversation. It's a fascinating change we're going into, and grab your popcorn. It's going to get pretty interesting and real. Hi again. Actually, I have one more point I want to discuss that I left dangling. A little earlier in the presentation, I said the phrase, a developmental perspective applicable to the universe. If you look at our understandings of various aspects of life and the universe and reality, we have in our kind of culturally accepted modes of thinking and inquiry come to basically a systemic understanding in many of the disciplines that we have been pursuing. So we have a systemic understanding of ecology. We have a systemic understanding of, let's say, human biology. We have a systemic understanding of life processes. We have a systemic understanding of, let's say, linguistics, of psychology, etc., and so on, sociology and whatnot. That systemic understanding it's kind of like the way I conceive of it is a first step to gaining what I think is a truly systemic perspective, which is ultimately ends in a holographic understanding. Apart from that, a systemic understanding is an essential understanding of the connectedness of reality. And to the extent our perspective in any given discipline has not attained systemic reach, to that extent is that discipline, the thinking in that discipline on the basis of a disconnected way of viewing and understanding, and that disconnection has been basically our legacy. It corresponds to what I was describing as the quarantine of knowing, that we have a disconnection from larger structures that would include our Earth as one small part. So that a growth into systemic understanding is therefore a growth toward regaining those kinds of connections in our theoretical viewpoints that were severed in whatever fashion and for whatever reason in the theoretical development of the disciplines in question. So that attaining a systemic understanding is essential for reintroducing and recommitting ourselves to the kinds of connections that are actually very real in the way that life and matter and the universe works. An interesting point here is that we have attained systemic knowing, as it were, basically only for on-world phenomena, such that any systemic understanding that we have has been limited to processes that are part of Earth's processes, whether those are human processes, sociological processes, life processes, ecological processes, and whatnot. The fact is that we have yet to attain a systemic understanding for an off-world viewpoint, and that's a huge limitation. It is, that limitation is reflected in what I find the almost ridiculous, silly understanding of the Big Bang, that how all of this reality formed, which is so tightly intertwined in its functioning and in the laws that we have come to understand as so-called laws, is so oriented toward developing life. It's a bio systemic reality. The fact that this entire universe could function in such a fashion where one tiny little change in any of what are called the so-called constants, and all of matter would fly apart, or life wouldn't develop, and so on and so on. So that we have in the reality of this universe a kind of interconnection that is not reflected in the basic understanding, the basic cosmology that is accepted in culture, which is the Big Bang, which I said is basically ridiculous. That you could have this kind of random process of matter somehow agglomerating through what they call gravity, etc., and so on, and have it work out such that it's so incredibly finely tuned to developing life, basically anywhere that life can develop. Silly. So the Big Bang is just a sideline effort that is basically entirely wrong in my perspective. That this is not how the universe works. I won't right now go into describing how I view the universe to work from my own perspective, from what I have been able to kind of piece together from whatever evidence I can view. But I will say this, that the interconnectedness is the functional basis of any idea of wholeness. And let me approach this from the direction, let's say, of quantum physics. If you go into the theory of quantum physicists, and of course this theory is basically generated by people who have been given a kind of received knowing that they're not adequate in their experience to understand and to process. And so you get this kind of bastardized result that the kinds of theories that they produce are theories that are contradictory in the result. And one of those theories is that one of those understandings, one of those perspectives, basically it's a key element in how they theorize about the so-called particles that they theorize about, is that particles cannot have any extension in space. And this due to the fact that any particle with any sort of extension to act as a particle, that is, to act in its wholeness as a particle, would have to act simultaneously and instantaneously across that wholeness. And of course, poor old Einstein, who was, who's like 100 years old, his theories are 100 years old and obsolete. Poor old Einstein can't reckon that with his theories, that there can be instantaneous action in the universe. And so the quantum theorists say, well, we can't have instantaneous action, and so particles can't have extension in space. So particles are points. They're basically spaceless objects, which is ridiculous because the whole idea of particle is spatial extension. It is space. That's what it means to be particle. So that basically you've got people here theorizing in ways that are just foundationally contradictory. Oh my God, these people can't think. And so what is required then is an understanding of the actual interconnectedness of all of which goes into making any reality whole. And any reality that is nameable as such is, of course, whole. It's a thing. It's an entity. It's a, how would you call it? It's a single reality. You call it a single reality. A particle is a single reality. And so anything that is whole, by definition of its wholeness, if that wholeness is real, is something that exists in its wholeness with instantaneous communication across that wholeness. It's like your awareness doesn't take time to be one, to be single. It is always already single. All that language that, let's say Adida used so often, this always alreadiness of reality. He's totally right. That reality in its wholeness function is always already as it is as whole. And being always already, it functions simultaneously across the wholeness and instantaneously in its action as being whole, so that a particle moves as a particle. It doesn't just like one part move and the other part catch up. No, it's not the way a particle is. A particle moves through space in its whole functionality, which means there is an instantaneity, an instantaneousness by which that what we understand as that wholeness and can define as that wholeness moves and functions in its reality as a spatial reality. Now that wholeness, that instantaneity and that simultaneity is the basis of a holographic connected understanding. And that holographic connected understanding is precisely what is missing in cosmology. So that we don't have, for instance, therefore, a developmental understanding that says, well, there are developmental gradations in our galaxy, that solar systems, certain of them are earlier, certain of them are later, and the earlier ones are connected and related to the later ones in a developmental sequence. We don't have any of that understanding. None of it. We don't have an understanding that our galaxy is related to other galaxies. It's all this, like, that interconnection was lost in the arbitrariness of a whole bunch of matter just kind of crashing about and somehow creating planets and stupid ideas. My God. Anyways, those ideas are developmentally appropriate because what is lacking in that understanding is an understanding of interior relatedness. What you have, for the most part, as our understandings, whether it's in physics, psychology, whatever, is an external only perspective and relatedness. So that let's say Einsteinian physics, Einstein said there's no spooky action at a distance, right? i.e. there's no internal relatedness. There's only external relatedness, which is external causation, therefore local causation. Okay, that's the basis of almost all thinking on this planet currently, is external relatedness only. Of course, external implies internal, and for external to be external, there must be an internal, of course, and we know that there is an internal reality. We call this awareness, for instance. And it's a single reality. It's not broken up into parts. It's single, but it's interiorly differentiated. It has interior differentiated content, and so on. But this interior reality is fundamentally interconnected, lo and behold, and so it has an interior relatedness through that interconnection, which is that interconnection. And that interior relatedness is completely absent in any sort of off-world understanding that we have, whether it's in the development of stars, the development of galaxies, the progression of universal structures over time, typically called Big Bang and the expansion, all that silly stuff, right? None of that stuff makes sense in a scalar Tesla universe, let me tell you that. And I can't personally wait for the day until it's all shuffled off the table into the trash can. So what we're missing is a developmental perspective in the universe. And so that, for instance, my talking about human reality on this planet being at a certain developmental stage of progression makes sense only in a context where you have internal relatedness as a function of the way the entire universe operates, right? So this is part of the shift we're going into, is we are going into, sorry about that, I hit the pause button. We are shifting into a viewpoint which includes both internal and external relatedness, where the two are set in polar opposition as two faces, just like internal and external, wave and particle. The one and the many are in polar relation, which is that they imply each other. They are always coexistent, and they function as mirror images in the sense of one is always absolutely referenced and mirrored by the other. But that mirror is an asymmetrical mirror. You have to kind of get used to those kinds of things. But that's for a later discussion.